everybody, welcome to the last video of the week. I think I actually managed to come in slightly under time this week, although probably not as short as you all would have preferred. This one's also going to be a really quick one because all I want to do in this video is to ask that critical question that we started with. How did segregation get to be so bad in Detroit, and why did it stay that way? So what I want you to do now is to look at that question. I want you to think about it a little bit, and I'd like you to hit pause and see what kinds of answers you can come up with for how segregation got and stayed so bad in Detroit. And then when you're done, you can stop, you can hit play again, and we'll come back. So if you're hearing my voice, you hit play again, and that means you may have some answers. So how should we answer this question? How did segregation get and stay so bad in Detroit? Well, the answer in my mind is pretty much every kind of institution and every kind of structure that you could imagine. From the economic structures that resulted from African Americans who were impoverished in the South, moving to the North, getting the lowest paid jobs in the North, the economic structures that kept them from being able to afford houses in other places, compounded by the cultural structures which kept them from moving into even neighborhoods where they could afford housing, because the endemic racism allowed some people simply to casually say that those people were not wanted here. From those deeper structural questions that reinforced one another to the civic and market institutions that provided the impetus for many of those developments, the cultural institutions that neighborhoods formed to keep themselves all white, the market institutions that emerged in banking and real estate that realized that profits were to be made by keeping neighborhoods all white. These kinds of institutional decisions on top of structural decisions help to maintain and even deepen the segregation that was there. And we haven't even started to talk yet about government institutions that further exacerbated that problem. And I want to argue that all of these things were self-reinforcing. The civic institutions reinforced the market institutions. The government institutions reinforced both. And all of these intersected with underlying cultural and economic tendencies that made this thing very, very hard to root out. In fact, we're still working to root this out, and we don't have an easy solution even now. This is the kind of underlying structural and institutional momentum that carried segregation through over 100 years in the city of Detroit. The only caveat that I would make is that as bad as it got, it doesn't mean that the individuals who were being segregated simply gave up. And so in addition to the stories we're telling here of segregation, we are also telling stories about survival, telling stories about response, telling stories about how to understand the structures well enough to make meaningful action like the Franklins did and like so many other families and groups did who were being segregated. This is in fact the very definition of strategy, understanding a structure so well that you can take meaningful action, and that's precisely what we see in African American communities that were facing the structures and institutions of segregation. So that's the big picture for this week. What we have to move to next week, of course, is questions of how to make it better. Before we can think about how policy can make it better, whether that's policy in the government realm or the market realm or the civic realm, the kinds of institutions that could actually make things better, we actually need to look at how policy, in particular government policy, the acts of government institutions, made things worse. So that's what we'll do next time. We'll start with government institutions, show how they continue to dig the hole rather than to fill it in, and show how now, in the situation that we're in at present, it might be possible to use policies to make the problem less bad, and maybe someday get to a point where it isn't as big a problem as it is now. That's really what I want to talk about for now. I thank you for your attention, or as they say in Punjabi,
to say thank you everyone in Punjabi, we say Dhanvad Sayanu.